This meeting is being recorded.
Okay, everybody can see me?
Yes. And
Can everybody hear me?
You're not driving a bus.
No, we're not.
That's true.
We're not driving a bus today. We will still drive go on a spiritual journey together.
Okay.
All right. Okay, so let's jump into this week's Torah portion. Parshat Balak, a very fascinating Torah portion for so many reasons. We have one storyline throughout this entire parsha, and also remarkably, of all the parshas, something I pointed out in the past, but from the beginning of the Torah till the very last parsha of the Torah, this is a unique parsha. It stands separate and apart from all the other parshas in the Torah, in that the main actors of the Torah are not the main actors of this parsha. We do not have any other parsha like this in the entire Torah, in which if somebody told you that they are playing the role of the Jewish people in this parsha, it's a non-speaking role, right? Like that, the old joke, a mother whose kid comes home from school and says, "Mommy, you're gonna be so excited." Says, I got a role in the play, in the coming school play. And the mother says, well, what is that? It says, I'm playing the Jewish husband. And his mother turns to him and says, go back and tell him you want a speaking role.
The speaking part, right? That's exactly right.
So in this case, in any other parsha, to say that you are acting as the Jewish people, let's even go better. Moshe Rabbeinu, right? In this parsha, it means you have a non-speaking role, basically. And it's the only such parsha. From the beginning of the Torah, whoever is deemed as the main drivers of the narrative, of the storyline, be it Adam, be it Noah, be it Avram Avinu, be it Yitzchak, be it Yaakov, etc., be it the Jewish people and Moshe Rabbeinu, the camera is always focused right over their shoulders for the entire length of the Torah. Right? They're not speaking in first person, but they are definitely the main actors. They are the main players in the story, and the Torah is very much zeroed in on them and how all the events that transpire, their perspective on it, right? And the camera is very firmly affixed right over their shoulder, and that holds true from the very first Torah portion till the very last Torah portion, without deviation except for one. And which parsha is that?
This one.
Yes. This parsha is the only parsha in which the Jewish people basically don't feature. They're in the background. And the parsha is told from beginning to end, from the perspective, from the beginning to the near end. At the very end, the last aliyah, it shifts back to the Jewish people, but almost kind of to do housekeeping, to kind of finish off the storyline. Once we can no longer focus on Bilam in the storyline because he has left, but the story and his role in it still is playing out. So now we have to shift kind of back to the Jewish people, which sets up the next parsha, Parshat Pinchas. But interestingly enough, we really have a unique parsha. We're not just telling the Torah. This parsha is not from the main actor. The camera is firmly fixed, not over a neutral party, but over the shoulder of the villain. The villain, and perhaps one could argue, other than Paro himself, the singled out greatest villain of the Torah, right?
I thought it was Amalek.
But that's not a person. I'm saying it's a specific individual, a named individual that acts as a villain, an evil person standing athwart the Jewish people. Maybe Lavan, maybe you can say Lavan, right? Paro, if you had to put your hierarchy of villains in the Torah, but in a certain way, and we're going to talk about it, Bilam is actually right up there, and we're telling the story from his point of view. At times, we're almost even sympathetic to him and his struggles in trying to have his efforts to curse the people come to fruition, and it keeps on getting thwarted by God. And his Balak is beating up on him earlier. The contingent that is sent to him, some of them beat up on him. Then God beats up on him. Then the donkey beats up on, or rather, he beats up on the donkey. Right, an angel beats up on him. There's a lot of we're telling a story. Bilam takes the place, really, of what has heretofore been the very comfortable position of the great positive, the protagonists. And this is a Torah portion in which we're telling the story from the antagonist's standpoint, and dare we say, we almost humanize him at times. And it's a very interesting thing, and I think there's a lot to be learned over here. First and foremost, as Rashi cites, Bilam is not just your average run-of-the-mill antagonist. He's not just the next in the long list of tsaris makers for Klal Yisrael. And there are a lot of them.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think we'd all agree, way too many of them, right?
Oh, yeah.
And each one of them has attempted to do their damage to certain degrees of success, but ultimately, again, we are still here. None of them are none of them are, but the past ones are not. We're contending with a new band of antagonists, but slowly but surely we're working them also into ancient history. Dare I say, tongue in cheek, and maybe this shouldn't be on the recording, and I'll have to see if I'll edit this out. But I think that Bibi Netanyahu got a phone call from heaven and says, "Could you slow down a bit? We don't have enough virgins to go around for all the murders we're sending up here."
It's really bad.
I don't know him. I don't know this guy.
Right.
Yeah, right. But you got to be able to what's it called. But ultimately, the bottom line is that in the list of antagonists, Bilam holds a unique place in the sense that what? He will act, Bilam will be exhibit A when the nations of the world turn and say, God, you know why we were not, as aware and subservient to you as your chosen people, the Jewish people? It's because you gave them something you never gave us. You gave them a leg up by giving them Moshe. I mean, if we had somebody who was as aware of the divine as Moshe was, we would have been more aware of the divine. And we would have therefore been, and so it's not fair that you're giving all this, when Mashiach comes, it says that once the Jewish people finally earn what they have earned in terms of their millennial long devotion to God, come hell or high water, that the nations of the world are going to complain. Why that? Why not us? And there's going to be there's going to be in a sense, a debate that breaks out. God's going to point out this. They're going to counter argue, and one of their arguments is going to be this point: we didn't have a Moshe Rabbeinu, and God is going to reply, "Oh yes, you did.
You had Bilam.
I made one of the nations of the world as on the same caliber of divine awareness as Moshe Rabbeinu himself, and that is Bilam." Now, Bilam had free will, and he was also the product of his society, and he could have easily have been a Moshe Rabbeinu. In the end, as a product of his society and the world around him and what the world wanted him for, the world made him into a destructive tool. A tool to use that divine awareness on how to destroy nations. And he was a nation destroyer. Bilam was a nation destroyer. And that was his business card. Literally, it was his shingle hanging. And it's why Balak sent for him. Because the parsha opens up and basically, it begins that Balak, Vayar Balak ben Sipor, And Balak, the son of Zippor, saw all that the Jewish people had done to the Amorites. What does this mean? This is like the opening verse, and it sets the table, it sets the context for the story that comes from forward. Is because Balak actually was not a Moabite, but the Moabites farmed out their throne to this Balak after, because it says, Balak ben Zippor, Melech leMoav ba'etahi, that Balak ben Zippor was the king of Moab at that specific time.
Yeah.
As in, not previously, not after. Why? Because he was not of the dynastic line. He was actually not a naturalized, or not a natural-born Moabite citizen. Rather, in the aftermath of the Jewish people bulldozing through the great two sentinels that stood at the gate of the land of Canaan, everybody knew when the Jewish people left Egypt, they were on their way to occupy Palestine. I'm sorry, guys. You just have to forgive my.
Okay, we get it.
I'm in that kind of mood. Yeah.
We
You're
get
in the mood.
But they were on their way to come to return to their ancestral
Have you
homeland.
been talking to Dermer?
Right. No, actually not. Not. But yes. Ultimately, we got to watch it out. We gotta treat all the farcical headlines and narratives of the world as that.
Yeah.
Farcical, narish, silly foolishness, and
It is Narishkeit. It is.
So yeah. So either way, Bilam. So the Jewish people are on the way, and when the sea split, first of all, when they busted out of Egypt, a land that had not, where it was Kur HaBarzel, it was a steel cistern in the fact that not one enslaved individual ever busted out of the land of Egypt. And here, a nation of 1.5 million bust out of the world's greatest superpower. Then the Red Sea splits and their enemies are swallowed up. At that point in the Az Yashir, right, the Jewish people sing, Namogu Kol Yoshvei Canaan. All those dwelling in the land of Canaan started to tremble because they knew where the Jewish people are headed. But to a certain degree, there was a certain great solace, because while Egypt was the great superpower of the world, Pharaoh was not the individually strongest person. There was two great sentinels, giants, that they themselves were worth any nation's full army.
Sichon and Og.
And that were Sichon and Og. And
we
almost
just
as
killed
an
them.
almost as an aftermath, as an afterthought in last week's Torah portion, it says the Jewish people rolled in and just bulldozed over them.
Right.
In fact, it goes so far to say that as various parts of these nations that were meantime swallowing up, the Torah goes out of a way to say that in the history books and in the hymns of that era, of that time, it was spoken with absolute certainty that a Sichon or Og set their eyes on your a particular piece of land, then there was nothing say goodnight, say goodbye. They took it as a matter of fact. They were just that powerful and that unstoppable. And the Jewish people turned them into mincemeat. So much so that in one part of the land of Sichon, it says that they were sending a contingent of spies, interestingly enough, to go check out how to best conquer another part of the land of Sichon. And the Jewish people had such momentum that the spies themselves just conquered it. Forget that they came back with the strategy. They went, they saw it, they conquered, right? That's perhaps where the expression comes from, right? They literally didn't even come back and then muster the soldiers. They just went in and took it, right? There's that old line about somebody, unfortunately an anti-Semite, but Patton, right? In World War II, right? Where the Central Command saw that, in his trajectory, he was trying to conquer, that he was about to come to a certain point in his in his trailblazing, where that was going to be too much for him. to conquer. So they immediately sent a missive very quickly to get to him. Don't try and take this on. Don't attempt this, because our analysis, whatever it is that you're going to fail. And if you attempt this, it's going to be a real stymie the forward progress. And the better you wait and muster and regroup and whatever it is, and then we'll make a what's it called? His letter back was, "I've already conquered it. Shall I give it back?" Right.
Punch him in the nose and kick him in the tuchus.
Right. So ultimately, the Jewish people are sitting here, and they're just on such a momentum that all of a sudden Moab, that was calmly sitting behind the lines, as it were, the front lines of Sichon and Og, of the Amorite and the Bashanite regions, is all of a sudden find themselves on the front lines with Sichon and Og going down, just an absolute whimper. So now they are panicking. And interestingly enough, also Midian. Now it's interesting because Midian had no dog in the fight. They were a little bit like Amalek, which is what we're going to actually make a reference to coming that Midian had no dog in the fight, which is why, to a certain degree, God extends his eternal war to include Midian, not just Amalek, and actually tells Moshe that this is going to be his final battle. Right, go out and wage this battle, and afterwards you will pass on. This is kind of the final battle you got to, because Midian is an offshoot of Amalek. Why? Because just like we said earlier about Amalek came to travel to wage war with Israel. They were not in the Jewish people's direct line. They had no reason to feel threatened by the Jewish people, and yet they felt it incumbent upon them to cut the Jewish people down out of pure hatred. The same thing we find with Midian. Midian here collaborates with Moab in trying to hire Bilam, and actually even a step further, they're the ones ultimately that sacrifice their own daughters to corrupt the Jewish people and actually bring about, as we'll talk at the end of this week's parsha. So, which is why in the next week's Torah portion, Hashem says, "Go out and wreak a vengeance on Midian for stepping in unnecessarily and for causing Jewish blood to be spilled," and makes this Moshe's job, and that's going to be in Parshat Pinchas. But in this week's parsha, Moab has a real concern, and so they go and they bring in a king. Desperate times called for desperate measures. They oust whoever the Moabite king was at that time, and they install Balak. Why? Because Balak is a wily guy, and he thinks outside the box. And the plan that he comes up ain't half too bad. What's his plan? His plan was as follows. The Jewish people have changed up the script here. Till now, it was well known that Hakol Kol Yaakov v'hayadayim yedei Esav. That Esav has the brute force advantage. The Jewish people have a direct line with God. But the way they understood that to mean was, as seems apparent from the fact that they were enslaved for 210 years in Egypt, is that they didn't have the brute force. They were the Mel Brooks, not the Mel Brooks, the, what's his name? God, what is that name of that Jewish comedian that acted in all the what's his name? With the round glasses always. That always came across as the Kvetchi Nuji Jew.
Gene Wilder?
No.
Woody
Allen?
Woody Allen. The Woody Allen Jew.
I know.
Running nose and
Pathetic.
Right. They said, okay, they have a direct line with God, but put a sword in their hand, right? And they wouldn't know what to do with it. They wouldn't know the right way to hold it. I don't know. Give me a bowl of soup. Let me sit on a couch, kind of thing.
Give me a
right?
bowl of soup.
Right. That's what they. Then all of a sudden, the Jewish people are the world's great military might. Sounds familiar, right? Unexpectedly so.
It happens.
Right. Yeah, and they're as somebody said over here, they're kicking tuchus and taking names, right? So Balak says, Till now we were counting on the fact that while they had the voice, they didn't have the arms, right? That was our thing. Now, unfortunately, we've been proven wrong, right? The Jewish people are quite the military might. They took care of Egypt. They've taken care of Amalek once, right? They've now taken care of Sichon and Og. So Balak says we have to throw out all convention, which is that we will beat them in a show of arms, as it were. Rather, we have to try, and if they're going to be using the arms, let's us use the voice. Let's fight them with their own weapon. If they're going to take our weapon, let's take their weapon. Let's flank them, metaphorically. And so he says, let's hire Bilam. Why? Because Bilam has already shown that if he curses a nation, that nation goes down. That's what he's become very good at. He has become very good at divining, no pun intended,
Right.
God's moment of particular angst. As Rashi citing the Talmud says, he knows how to find that moment of God's discipline and severity, and to use that to, in a sense, to make a case to curse a nation, and then ultimately make that nation vulnerable, and allow for someone, another nation, perhaps even inferior, to be able to come in and take care of business. And so they send for Bilam, and they send a contingent of elders of Moab and elders of Midian. Again, this is a part. It's like, why Midian? Why are you mixing into this? Right? There was no need to mix into this. But again, the same reason why the UN has to mix into things, right? Good old Jewish hate, right? And our bad old Jewish hate. The point being that they send to Bilam. From the get-go, Bilam is made. It's made clear to Bilam by God that don't mistake the Jewish people. They don't have a bad moment in my eyes. You have found for each moment at the time that I am less than patient, as it were, with a particular nation. The Jewish people don't have that by me, because they are my children, and ultimately, even if they are not fully deserving of my largesse, they get it. That's what it means to be God's children, right? You can have an absolute brat of a child, right? That if all things considered, not my children, other people have such children, right? But on the playground, right? Other parents will all come to consensus that this child does not deserve whatever it is, considerations are being given. But a parent, they don't, of course, right? They don't see it that way. And this parsha makes that point more than any other, and is why, for a certain degree, this parsha is not told from the standpoint of the Jewish people, because they don't even have to be active in earning God's solicitude, earning God's protection, earning God going to bat for them. This whole parsha happens unbeknownst to them. They are completely unaware. They don't know that as they're camped out there, wherever they're camped, that this threat is looming. And that makes the story all the more beautiful for Klal Yisrael. We all have moments where after the fact, we become aware that somebody went to bat for us, right? Somebody was saying something, right? Your friend comes to you and says, oh, you just know somebody was bad-mouthing you, whatever it is. And so-and-so and so-and-so got up and protected you, defended you, set the record straight, what have you. And there is something really special about the fact that this person didn't do it to earn my acknowledgement or what have you, or to earn a favor in return. They never came in. This just happened. And that's how the depth of the relationship, that whether I'm aware of it or not, whether I asked for it or not, somebody came to bat. Somebody went to bat for me. Somebody stood up for me and protected me. We actually had that when it came to the Sudi. You can pass this on to Alan. Because you play a role in this. I'm not sure if you ever knew. When we started building the Chabad house on our property on Goldsboro, we were cringing the whole time because we knew that this was not necessarily going to be popular with all our neighbors, or maybe better put, was going to be unpopular with all our neighbors. and it wasn't going to be because people are anti-Semitic and not anything about it. It's just nobody likes a change to the status quo, right? And especially if the change includes building a community center in their neighborhood. Now, they can't claim it's a quiet neighborhood. They're on a state road and not a quiet state road. But having said that, any kind of change, people bought and spent a lot of money for the property they had. And here we're going to be some sort of change, good or bad, whatever it is. And in speaking to many Chabad rabbis, because this is a modus operandi for Chabad rabbis, we kind of do this a lot. We drop into a neighborhood like an atom bomb, right? Right.
Well, it depends on the zoning. Montgomery County is very, very good in a sense with allowing places of worship almost anywhere. California is not.
Right. Montgomery County, thank God, there's a lot of things that work in our favor. It's also nice that it's a county and not a city. Cities could get a little bit more nitty gritty and things. And we didn't belong to an HOA because that could get even worse. The worst and the hardest things are HOAs. But ultimately, this is something that a lot, I would say nearly 50% of all Chabad centers have to do, because they don't generally, when a Chabad center is starting out and growing, they're not coming with like the millions on a board and all that, and they're finding then a nice property on the corner of a highway and this and that. They're usually starting in a neighborhood in a house, and then they convert it, and the next thing they know, right? It's interesting, we don't convert Jews that much, but we convert houses a lot. We do a lot of,
convert Jews.
Well, we bring Jews back to the Yiddishkeit. Chabad tries to, for the most part, to stay out, because again, it's one of those things. We leave that to Beit Dins and whatever it is to getting involved in conversion.
You don't do conversions.
But we do conversions. We do it to houses. But a lot of it, is running the gauntlet of oftentimes doing something when the neighbors are not necessarily thrilled, and then it is about asserting our federal or state rights to be able to do it and what have you. But usually it comes down to some sort of showdown that involves City Hall or involves the municipality, what have you. Lawyers have to get involved. And we fully expected that at one point or another, this was probably going to happen. In fact, the city remembers we were articulating this concern when we were standing on the lawn of this prospective property for sale on Goldsboro and looked right across the street. And we saw, it said that whoever lives right across the street would have a very vested interest, and clearly it would have that financial means to give us a lot of tsaris in this regard.
Didn't the Israeli Chabad in Rockville have unbelievable amounts of tsaris?
Yes, decades. They had a decade worth of tsaris. Yeah. And then they actually ultimately had to make a decision to not try in that neighborhood. And they bought next, Baruch Hashem just had the ribbon cutting for, they took over the old JCA building, the Jewish community, whatever JCA stands for. I forgot what it stands for at this moment. But thank God, Baruch Hashem, everybody, all stories have a happy ending as long as it's Chabad. But the bottom line is that, so when we started building and we put up the structure and whatever became obvious to anybody who was looking that this was not going to be just a residential extension, and we were cringing, we were waiting, and ultimately we went through the entire project and nothing. So I said, I guess nobody had a problem with it. And for a year or two, that's what we felt. We really thought that. Then we went. I was sitting and I was schmoozing with one of our neighbors who we had become close with, who was diagonally across the street. Gabriel, who was here in the class, has an intimate knowledge not of the people but of the property, because ultimately That's probably the one for sale next door to the house directly across from us. And it was a good, a very pleasant Jewish couple. His name was Bernie Burgunder, and he was 100 years old when we got to know him, sharp as a tack. And he once turned to me and he said, "Rabbi," he says, "you did something that nobody had done for decades in this area." He says, "You united the neighborhood against."
Against you.
Yeah. And he says there was, just unbeknownst to you, that there was meetings, and a lawyer was hired to start putting together all the facts for a case against him.
Wow. And you didn't know anything.
Nothing. Now, ultimately, right, they hired Bilam, right? The neighbors, they came together and they hired Bilam to make the case to the authorities that be, to oust you from the neighbor, or at least stop you from a building. Now, ultimately, it's interesting that, thank God, a lot of Chabads, try to see if they can skirt the edges of the law to kind of get certain things done more expeditiously. And we had very good advice from many people who were involved that said, "Rabbi, don't do anything that is not dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's, etc." Thank God we did it, even though it came at certain expenses and certain delays and certain reformatting of our plans. But we did it, and said, the lawyer took a look and he says, "I'm very reluctant to take this, guys, because you're going to expect results, and they're doing everything by the book. We can still try and whatever it is." But then ultimately, somebody came to bat at these meetings for us, and it was none other, Sudi, than Steve Canton, not Jewish, our neighbor from across the street, who.
Oh yeah, you're friendly with the guy across the street.
Yes, but Alan and Sudi know very well because he had worked for Alan back in the day. Also he's a very strong, passionate Christian, believes very strongly in Israel, and is very strong. And he had also gotten to know because God is nothing if not enjoys making his divine providence known at times. This Gentile fellow, 1 in 5 billion in the world, and 1 in 300 million in the United States, is the one guy who has 2 houses by us and in Palm Beach, Florida, and not randomly, but by divine providence, lives across the street from the Chabad in Bethesda and next door to the Chabad rabbi in Palm Beach.
Wow.
And he got very close with that rabbi because he had a pool in his house in Palm Beach, and this family with the rabbi and young kids move in and they don't have a pool, and he's being a nice guy. He goes over and says, "Hey, I notice you have a whole bunch of kids. Welcome to the neighborhood. If you want to use my pool, feel free at any time. Let your kids go swimming." And they built up a relationship, and he started to get involved with Rabbi Shiner at the Palm Beach Synagogue and started studying Chumash, as he calls it. Chumash with Rabbi Shiner. And Chumash, and he says, in this Chumash is all the wisdom of the world. There's more wisdom in this than anything else. And he's become a very, very strong fan of studying Torah in the original. I gave him as a gift a copy of the Chumash we use in our shul, and he says, "Don't tell Rabbi Shiner, but your Chumash is better." Yeah. And but ultimately, what is remarkable is that he came and he said, "Guys," at one of these parlor meetings about what to do about the Chabad, he says, "Guys, what are we doing here?" And if you know Steve Canton, I'm doing a pretty good imitation of him. Sudi, you'll vouch for it. "What are you doing here? What are we doing here? This is a really good thing. This is a blessing from God. We have a holy place. People are going to come together and pray to the Lord right in our neighborhood. Why would we want to stop that? This is only a blessing."
They forgot their reasons.
Yeah, and ultimately, what is remarkable is this all is happening. This whole drama and narrative and original
behind
kind
your
of concern, this is all happening, as it were, with the in a sense the group. I'm not going to call myself the protagonist. That's a little too self-indulgent, but in a sense, you were the subject, right? The most impacted player, right, unwitting from beginning to end of this entire process.
So you're driving around the neighborhood, waving at all your neighbors. Ah!
By the way, we've gone on a charm offensive, and since we've been more charmed than offensive. Let's put it that way. But yeah, look, we became very close with the neighbor next door to our right of the Chabad. When originally we were told, don't bother. He's an old man who, since he's lost his wife, has become not a very pleasant person to deal with. At best, he will be ambivalent. At worst, he will be outrightly antagonistic. In fact, he was part of those who had originally been, engaged in and what to do about stopping Chabad from building. He was there, but and I was told to be concerned about him. And so for months, we never had anything to do with him. But then one time, I was delivering challah to somebody else in the neighborhood. They were in home, so I'm holding 2 challahs, and I was going with my little Meishala, my son, who was at that point was young and cute. He still is cute, but then he was younger and cuter.
Cute.
Yes, but he was like 6 or 7 at that time. And I'm holding challahs, and I'm walking with my little son. I'm like, if there's ever going to be a time I'm going to knock on this Jew next door, this is the time to do it. I'll have the challahs, and worst comes to worst, and he starts yelling at me. I'll hide behind Meishala. He'll be my human shield. And so we went and we knocked on the door on a Friday afternoon, and his housekeeper came and answered. And I said, "Is David Morowitz home?" And he said, "Yes." So when I asked who's calling, I said, "Tell him his rabbi is here." So, and I was like, at that point, I was like, I wasn't sure what was going to happen, when we came face to face for the first time. And he comes down and he takes one look at me and he goes, "Hello."
Wow.
And then we came into the house and we had a 2.5-hour conversation. I rolled in 5 minutes before Shabbos, and I said, "Nachami, I'm sorry that I wasn't home to help and prepare, but it was very good."
Wow.
For a very good reason. And ultimately, now that's the house that we're in right now. So it's a remarkable thing, and to a certain degree, this parsha more than any other, and this is why it is included in the liturgy. We have on the eve of Rosh Hashanah a tradition of doing what is called hatarat nidarim, right? To nullify our vows, because you want to come into Rosh Hashanah without any baggage, carrying any baggage from the previous year. So any vows that you've made, that you've committed to, either knowingly or unknowingly, that you are now not up to fulfilling, whatever it is, that's not good baggage to you taking into the new year where you're really trying to get a clean slate, etc. So there's a process of hatarat nidarim that is done. Preferably, you can do it the whole month of Elul if you need to, but it is preferably done on the day before Rosh Hashanah. With a bet din, you convene the bet din, you sit there and you say, "Shimona Rabotai, listen to my rabbis, Dayanim Mumchim, expert judges, Kol Neder or Shvua, or any promise or commitment or vow that I have made, whether knowingly or unknowingly, whatever." And you go through this process. And it's a legalistic process. You say they nullify, but because it's Jewish, we can't leave it good enough alone, in which you say this whole long-winded legalese, in which you say any version of an oath that I made advertently or inadvertently, knowingly or unknowingly, or if I've done it something 3 times, which establishes a trend, and I didn't say explicitly this should not become a trend. We go through all the legalistics. It's
so Talmudic.
It is a full page of legalese.
Why do you think there's so many Jewish lawyers?
Exactly right. But it gets better, because then the rabbis respond in triplicate. They repeat, you hereby are absolved, it shall be all permitted to you, etc., etc. And then they repeat the whole thing again. Again. And then 3 times. Right? You would think at that point you've settled it. No, we're Jewish. Of course it's not settled yet. So then you say, any oath I hereby say now, any oath that I will make from now into the future, so even the oath, except for the oath that I will make on the eve of Yom Kippur, which is to fast, that should stay valid. And then we go through the whole thing, and you say a second rejoice, to which, of course, the rabbis...
if I were an anti-Semite, I could make a big deal out of that.
I would say the opposite. Of course, we can poke fun at ourselves, but look how serious...
No, but I'm saying, if you are disavowing your vows, how do you do a deal with a Jew?
Because the answer is there is nobody who takes their word more seriously when they're saying that even the things that I'm not even aware of that I might have made it, but I may have left somebody with the impression, I'm going to take that seriously enough. I'm going to take my words seriously enough that even if I establish a trend and I didn't explicitly say this is not a trend, to me, that's already enough to be beholden to that I need to nullify it. Because as a safeguard. Now, it's in that legalese, Jerry, it says that anything that I have, however, committed to, I shall stay committed to.
Mm.
Anything that I have meant to stay committed, and I do plan on being committed to, and we say that. So the opposite, nobody takes their word more seriously than the nation that is Hakol Kol Yaakov. To the point, again, that this sits on my mind. Most people say, oh, come on, I didn't really mean it, right? I didn't mean it. I definitely didn't explicitly mean it. And even if I explicitly meant it, I really can get away with it. Nobody's really expecting it. That's across the board. Jews are ultimately so careful that even if nobody is taking it seriously, I'm still too concerned. So it's the opposite. I would say this is actually a biggest proof of how. And again, we don't even leave it good enough alone at that, right? So the rabbis say something in triplicate, but of course we can't let the rabbis have the last word. So we then have to follow up with the second little paragraph, a second soliloquy. But then of course the rabbis are not going to let us have the last word. The person, so they say, oh, we hereby whatever it is. But then here's the thing. The very last part of it is, and may all may you be absolved of any inadvertent commitment, and may God, in fact, turn all the curses into blessings, as it says in the Torah portion it says regarding the incident with Balak, right? And this is the quote in the Torah later when Moshe is quoting God in the book of Devarim, hearkening back to all the events that occurred. And here's the quote regarding this, the story in this week's Torah portion. Vayafo Hashem Elokecha, klala libracha, that God turned the curse into a blessing. In other words, not only did he just nudge you in the general direction of blessing, but even when there was an explicit curse leveled against you, machinations and efforts to curse you, to bring harm and destruction to you. Vayafo Hashem Elokecha et haklala livracha. Hashem turned the curse into blessing. Why? Because you deserved it? Because you earned it? No. Ki ahevcha Hashem Elokecha.
Because he loves
God
you.
loves you.
Because God, your Lord, loves you. Those are the words you enter into Rosh Hashanah with.
Yeah.
The day of judgment, the words that you're hearing from the rabbinical court down below, before you're going to be judged by the court up above, is that they are stating as a court. Think about this idea. As a court, they're saying based on the preponderance of evidence from the history of God and the Jewish people, and to quote God himself, we hereby pass the judgment that as you stand on the eve of Rosh Hashanah or wherever point you are in the year, and there is a curse leveled against you, know that as a matter of legal, a legal conclusion, of a legal verdict, the curse will be turned into a blessing. Why? Ki ahevcha Hashem Elokecha. Because it is a point of empirical evidence, an empirical fact, quoted by God himself, that God, your Lord, loves you.
You know, that reminds me of that. I took that class at the JLI, whatever call it, the
Retreat?
Yeah, retreat. And it was about whether or not Jews believe in karma. And the answer was not exactly. I mean, what you put in, you get back, but we have an in. You know, we have a special in with, you know, with God. So it's not pure
Right.
karma. Yeah.
It's exactly what I say on Rosh Hashanah all the time. It said the fix is in.
Right.
The fix is in. The judge is biased.
Right.
And
But
the judge,
we have to beg, forgiveness or whatever it is we have to do. But yeah, but we've got
right,
an in with the judge. Exactly.
we have absolutely an in with the judge.
Right.
And that's the point from this parsha. We don't even appreciate, and that's part of what the parsha is trying to say. It happened actually in last week's parsha also, that the Jewish people were passing through a gorge, the Arnon Gorge, and there was an ambush set for the Jewish people, which would have been devastating. And the two cliffs on either side of this very narrow gorge, and the Jewish people were passing on the bottom. In the cliffs, where our enemies were there ready to rain devastation down on the Jewish people. And God brought the cliffs together. Bam! And He made enemy kebab out of the Jew, and the Jewish people had no idea, and they would have actually remained completely unknowing of this until what? Until the Be'er Miriam wove its way through the nooks and crannies and washed out the remains of these ill-fated enemies of the Jewish people. And that's when we sang the song to the Be'er, right? There was one of the three songs of the Torah was in last week's Torah portion. It's remarkable, it's interesting that we go from Parshat Chukat, which every half aliyah is an entirely new narrative. Each one so full that it was like trying to drink from a water hose last week. There was so many topics to talk about, to discuss.
Yep.
Each half of an aliyah, from Paraduma to the passing of Miriam, to the hitting of the rock that costed Moshe everything, to Aaron's passing, to the attack of Amalek, to the fight to get them back, to trying to ask Edom to allow us to pass through their lands and having to turn around and going around, to the attack of the snakes because of our speaking ill about God, to the putting up the copper snake, which still today, till this very day, is the sign of healing. To then the battles with Sichon and Og, and included in all that, one of the three songs of the Torah. We have the song of the sea, the Az Yashir. We have the song of Moshe, the Ha'azinu. And then
that's a Haftorah. The Dvar is Haftorah.
Right, the Dvar is the Haftorah. And then we have in last week's parsha the song of the Be'er of Miriam, of the wellspring of Miriam. Ali Be'er, Az Yashir Yisrael, at Ashira Azot. The Jewish people sang a song, Ali Be'er Anulah. The song, O rise, you wellspring, that we sing to. And we're singing as gratitude for the fact that the Be'er, that the wellspring made us aware of another moment where God had our back, literally, when we otherwise didn't even know, as we're passing peacefully through this gorge, that there had been a horde of enemies. And I think at a time like this, especially, what a profound and important reminder. Because as I said, and I'll say it again, we have lived through unbelievable miracles with God's incredible protection in a way that none of us would have been able to fathom. And we can focus on the terrible tragedy of October 7th and the incredibly concerning rise in anti-Semitism in the world around us. But we have to also stop and recognize the absolute miracle that has been occurring with the machinations of our enemies coming to naught in the most remarkable ways. We're talking about a nation that has been building a plan as Israel's greatest threat, Persia, the rise of the threat of Persia for the second time in history, and decades of very careful and methodical investment in of financial and military, et cetera, and it comes to a head and it fizzles out so fantastically that those who don't see the hand of God in it are at this point cynical, blind, etc. And what's beautiful is that even the most non-religious Jew in Israel is singing, as we've talked about already a few times, that Hashem Yitbarach,
Hashem Yitbarach, Tamid
Tamid
ohev oti.
ohev oti.
Oti.
That God loves me in the same expression, ki ahevcha Hashem Elokecha, making that point that the Jews in Israel are walking around, they say, this is God, God loves us. But not only us, God
Rabbi,
loves
I don't know why I feel compelled, but did you hear about the sheikh in Hebron?
Yes.
Yeah.
And
Is
to
that
me,
amazing?
that
Yeah.
struck incredibly close to home because I've spent a lot of time in Hebron.
Well, remember
As-
my experience. Do you remember my experience in Hebron?
yeah. As I say, Jerry, you know better than most in terms of. No, Gabriel was not there with us. Gabriel came on our second Israel trip, but we spent the Shabbos in Hebron, and because you have to understand that it is a very real concern as to the population. They have done some horrific things to their Jewish neighbors over the years.
Yes.
Truly horrific. And the current mayor of Hebron was voted in on the platform that he had just come, a member of Hamas who had just come out of prison, serving a sentence. He was part of one of those prisoner exchanges because he had the blood of 6 Jews on his hands, and that's what
A big hero.
the big hero to their side, and yet that it should be Hebron, that in this hotbed, that they've read the writing on the wall, as it were, and they decided it makes more sense for them to be in an alliance with the Jewish people, not any love in their heart, but at this point recognizing the power of God in this circumstance. There's actually a song that's going viral right now. I'll send it to you if you are interested. It's a very interesting song sung by an Arab, and whoa, it takes a lot of guts on his part, but he says he's come to the conclusion that Allah is a Zionist.
Sings it in Arabic?
No, it's in English. It's in
Oh.
English, but it's I'll send it to you. But it basically saying, he says, if you're just going on by the evidence, it says here's this sliver of a nation. And it says Allah's got to be a Zionist.
Wow.
But ultimately, all kidding and joking aside, it is for us to have a humble sense of gratitude that this promise that God made, think about this, 3,000 years ago, 3,300 years ago, 10 times the age of the United States, 3 times the age of Islam, okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Twice the age of Christianity. God made a promise to the Jewish people and said, I will stand guard. And when the nations will come and they will try to curse you, I will turn those curses into blessings because I love you, and that will not change. And of course, we have to earn it.
What's that line that Joseph says? You meant it as to harm me, but I.
Right.
You meant
that you thought about it as for evil, but God saw it and thought it for good. Ultimately, this is our story, because there's no other way to explain the fact that we are here. That ultimately, again, we have to be able to take the big scope of history into consideration. We are thriving, although obviously with heartbreak and tragedy, because we are still in Galut, and this is not Mashiach's times. But to say that even in Galut, we don't see God's open hand and his shield of protection would be to be incredibly ungrateful and incredibly cynical. And that's not us. That's not Klal Yisrael. We are Yehudim. And to see 3,300 years later, the manifest hand of God in the daily news cycle is in the fruition of this promise that God made. Now, it is interesting to note that the only prophecy in the Torah, the only forward-looking prophecy about what will be for the Jewish people in the years to come, is actually out of the mouth of Bilam, because I think that also makes a point. That also makes a point that these are universal truths. It doesn't just have to be a Jewish prophet. Now, obviously, when you get into the book of the prophets, Isaiah and Ezekiel, etc., Daniel, you have all the prophets about the end times and what will be for the Jewish people. But in the Torah itself, the only prophecy that talks directly from the mouth of a prophet talking about Mashiach is the mouth of Bilam. And he talks about what it will be. So from the mouth of the same individual, we have an ultimate truth from the man who would least want to speak it, that God will never abandon his people. And ultimately, as all the rest of his truths have come to fruition, so too will this truth no doubt come to fruition, as he says, as he talks about Ar'enu v'lo ata, asherenu v'lo karov. I see it, it's not going to be soon, it's going to be, but darach kochav miyakov v'kam shevet miYisrael. Eventually there will rise a star in Jacob and a staff among Israel, who will ultimately bring about the end times, as the Rambam lays out all the details. Not only King David, the first of the dynastic line, but Mashiach, the conclusion of the dynastic line, the prophecy in the Torah about the times of Mashiach, where Hashem will ultimately bring to fruition his true goal for Klal Yisrael. May it be speedily in our days, from the mouth of Bilam to the fruition in this world. And we're already seeing manifest miracles. Let it be, God willing, the precursor to the ultimate miracle, the ultimate redemption, the coming of Mashiach, so that this year we will not have to observe and experience the 3 weeks with the 17th of Tammuz on the one end and Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av on the other end, the darkest period in the Jewish calendar, in which we once again have to relive the destruction and exile of the Jewish people, but rather we will be able to celebrate the return and the rebuilding of the Beis HaMikdash with the coming of Mashiach today.
Amen.
Amen.
All right. And may continue to daven and hear good news for everybody who needs it on a personal level. To Shoshana Bat Batya.
Shoshana Bat Batya, Ana Elna Rafanala.
Amen. And to everybody else that needs it, to Chaim Meir Tzvi Maria Shamalka, to Yehuda Pesach Ben Martia, to Shimon Ben Irene, to Kochava Bat Esther, to Rafael Ben Esther, rest.
Amen.
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 So Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat
Shabbat
Shalom,
shalom
Rabbi.
to
Thank
you,
you
my
so
Rabbi.
much.
Shabbat shalom lechulam.
Shabbat Shalom.
Tada.